Hi, my name is James Robson. I'm the Victor and William Fung Director of the Harvard Asia Center, and I wanted to welcome everybody to today's Director's Conversation as part of the Harvard Asia Center's virtual program series. So I'm really happy to be joined today by Dr. Russell Taylor, a lecturer on restorative dentistry and biomaterial sciences in the Harvard School of Dental Medicine. Dr. Taylor earned his dental degree from McGill University, then completed advanced education in general dentistry residency at the University of the Pacific, where he continues to teach. And Dr. Taylor also teaches dentistry at the University of Hue in Vietnam as part of his effort to modernize clinical practice there, and also has a private practice. Dr. Taylor is a philanthropist who participates in charity clinics locally as well as overseas each year, donating his dental services to the less fortunate. He also spent 8 years in San Francisco, where he was the team dentist for the Oakland Raiders, the Golden State Warriors, and the San Francisco Golden Gate men's elite rugby team. And I imagine there's a few broken teeth in that sport. And he's also served as a consultant for the Miss Asian Global Pageant. Dr. Taylor has received multiple awards, including the American Association of Dental Public Health Dentistry Award. And I just would like to welcome and thank him for joining me in this conversation today. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And it's great to give a presentation to the Asia Center. And yeah, thanks for getting to know a little bit more about what we do internationally.
Yes, I mean, this is one of the things we've been trying to do recently with the Asia Center is expand across the university and to parts of the university that we haven't always had conversations with faculty there and drawing on everybody who's doing work in some way in Asia. So thanks again. So I'd like to start with a very kind of a general question and just to begin with, which is to ask you a little bit about how you came to focus your work on Vietnam and to explain a little bit about what you've been doing there, but also how you made the choice to focus your efforts on building up dental education in Vietnam in particular.
You know, throughout my dental education, I was always taught, you know, part of being a dentist is, you know, to provide charity and community service. And you know, when I graduated initially, I was doing these direct care missions. So going to remote areas and doing dentistry. We were in Ecuador, we were in Fiji, you know, these sort of adventure style trips where you get into kind of a compromised situation and, you know, you try and take care of that local population that doesn't normally have access to care. One of my mentors invited me to go to Vietnam with him one time, and I just had such a wonderful experience and connection with that country and the people there, and felt really safe and welcome. And I was actually going every year back to Vietnam, going to different areas, and eventually I made my way into central Vietnam, into Hue. And there, I was working with a group of Vietnam War vets. So these were American veterans that were going back and providing medical and dental service to areas where they had, you know, had lost comrades and these sorts of things. And it was a really great program because the war vets, it was just very therapeutic for them to go back and honor the people that they were fighting for. And I really enjoyed it. You know, on these trips, sometimes there's language barriers, and there'll be times where I'll hire a translator, and often I'll get like a history translator or, you know, literature translator. And it can be difficult to translate a lot of the terms that I use as a clinical dentist, like, you know, myocardial infarction or, and so we had this idea that, well, why don't we hire some dental students when we're in Vietnam? And so we hired dental students, and very quickly the trip became less about treating the patients directly and learning about the dental school that's in central Vietnam and training those students better. So yeah, that's kind of how I got locked in there.
So it must be, I mean, you mentioned, you know, doing these trips to other parts of the world. And I would imagine with dentistry in particular that these are quite intensive in terms of specialized equipment that one needs. And so how does one do the kind of work that you need to do in these remote locations? That must present some serious challenges.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There are lots of challenges, including, just bureaucratic challenges getting the paperwork to get into these places. Vietnam, you have to get a medical license. They're set up to do that, but you need a special tourist medical license in order to get into those areas. And then you kind of need to decide, what your scope of practice is going to be. Are you going to be trying to run a clinic like in the US, or are you going to be focused more on emergencies? And that'll kind of dictate the equipment that you bring.
Hmm.
Those of you who've been to the dentist in the US, we have lots of toys. We have lots of gadgets and toys. So trimming that down to, the most essential items are key. When I'm doing those types of trips, I'll often have a remote compressor. It looks just like a carry-on bag, but it's filled with kind of a miniaturized dental unit, and that helps us do a lot of those treatments.
Wow. I mean, it must be really interesting when you go into these areas because I'm sure that many people listening will be like myself, that most of the time when we have no problems with our teeth, we don't, it's like the thing we don't think about. It's just it only begins to be something that you get concerned with and start to think about actually every single moment once you start to have that pain that begins and you just know it. And there's no ignoring it too, at least in my cases. I mean, it can just be excruciating. And so I imagine when you come into these areas that when you show up and are able to actually assist people with that, it must be quite incredible to see the reaction that comes from them, and also the perception that they have of you as a healer as well, bringing the ability to take that pain away. And I also, it made me then think about how have you, I would imagine in your interactions there too, you've come across sort of either local or just traditional ways of dealing with dentistry in the past. It's not something, that we really, I've hadn't thought about it all that much until I was, planning to have this conversation with you, but we have so much on pre-modern forms of medicine in all parts of the world, and different types of things, but I rarely read anything that's related to dentistry, but it must have been a big issue in the pre-modern period. So did they have forms of pain relief or any kind of care, or is this something that you've noticed at all?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. There's a lot of sort of natural remedies they use. There's oils and the like. What's interesting though, particularly with Vietnam, is that oral disease is changing, and it's changing very
Mm,
rapidly. So 40, 50 years ago, these abscessed teeth or necrotic infected teeth that can be quite painful were just not quite as common. People
mm,
were eating more of a rural diet. And then what's happened is now we've introduced a lot of refined carbohydrates into their diet, but we are lagging in that dental
mm,
care, where in the US, we can have that kind of rich carbohydrate diet and our dental care can kind of keep up with it. In Vietnam, there's not quite so much overlap. And so a lot of the times, yeah, there's just suffering, unfortunately.
yeah.
And what kind of breaks my heart is when there's suffering and there is, there's people that close by that can help, but they just don't really know how to help. And
Mhm.
that kind of ties into, my bigger purpose in Vietnam, which is not just to provide direct care, but to actually instruct those new clinicians in how to maybe care for those patients more appropriately.
Right. Well, I'd love to hear some more about that. I think, this issue of what's going on, or the kind of transformation, is sort of thinking about it as a kind of malady of modernization too, I would imagine, in many ways, and the change of diet and everything that causes that. So I would love to hear. So you have both sides of it. On the one hand, there's care for acute cases, obviously, but then, as you mentioned, kind of building up a capacity in Vietnam itself for dentistry. So I'd love it if you could explain a little bit about what you've been doing in terms of building up the dental education system in Vietnam itself, so that they eventually can then have trained dentists and to work on these cases locally themselves.
Yeah, I'm happy to share a little bit about that with you. I put together a little presentation to kind of, discuss some of the work that I've done to improve, dental medicine in central Vietnam. And so, the main issues that I'm seeing in Vietnam is there's a high prevalence of tooth loss. People are missing teeth there. And when you're missing teeth, you can't chew, and you end up being malnourished. And so people are losing teeth often because they're just leaving things go and kind of letting it rot away. They're not accessing the care that, they could have in order to protect their teeth. And, we have this direct correlation with poor oral health leading to poor general health. And so that's one of the things that building up your medical professional community can help improve general health of that population. And so what I noticed was from working with translators and newly graduated dentists is that the dentists that were graduating from Hui specifically are really underprepared to deliver the kind of care that their patients really needed. And that's something I wanted to address. And so, my translators invited me to their school. This is the school in Hue, Vietnam. They're very, very proud of this school. They love taking photos of the school. I love going there. This was actually a military hospital during the Vietnam War. The Americans had a base here and were treating patients in that facility. So it has kind of an interesting historic place. I surveyed a lot of the students in the school using polling software, and I just asked the question, hey, where are you guys from? Where do you want to practice? And it turns out that most of the students are from that central part of the region and kind of want to practice in and around that sort of critical central part of the country. To back up a little bit and give you some perspective on what is involved in training a dentist in the US, so your local dentist, what we do, just to kind of give some contrast. At the dental school here at Harvard, it's a 4-year program. So you finish your undergraduate degree in science or something in that realm. You do 4 years of dental school. Of those 4 years, your first year is 1 year of medicine. So you're side by side with the medical students. And then you spend about 1.5 years in a simulation clinic. And so this is similar to our Harvard simulation clinic, where we have mannequins that simulate patients, where you can practice, these very technique sensitive procedures on before actually having to touch a person. Once you've finished 1.5 years of this simulation, you do 1.5 years of direct care in the clinic. And that's often where I am, helping the students with live patients, making sure everyone stays safe, and they work towards becoming independent. At Harvard and in the US, we have competency-based programs. So until you can successfully do, for example, a filling on a mannequin or a simulation, you won't be allowed to do any work on a human. And that just keeps things safe, and it's good protocol. We have about 30 students at our dental school in Harvard, and we have about 120 faculty teaching these students. And tuition is about $62,000 a year. That's an awful lot. And just a little bit of a contrast to what we have in Hue. The Hue Dental School program is 7 years. Now this is right out of high school, so there's no undergrad. They have kind of the inverse. They have 120 students with only 30 faculty, so much less teaching, one-on-one teaching with faculty. They have really minimal simulation exercises, so they don't have a simulation lab. I'll show you a photo of what they have in a sec. And there's no competency-based learning, so they often are just observing. A lot of their textbooks that I've looked at are from the 1950s. They're French translations. They're just really out of date. Their school is $400 a year, which is kind of, a middle-class working family can still afford to go to dental school. And in 2012, I decided I was going to adopt this school. I was just going to take it under my wing and do what I can to support it, with the idea that they could then, serve their community a little bit better. So this is an example of their preclinical facility. At Harvard, each student will get their own mannequin like this for about 1.5 years to practice on. In Hue, they have 3 mannequins for 120 students. And, I just don't think they're used. They look like they've been untouched. So they're really not doing anything until they work on someone, and usually that's after they graduate. So some of the research questions I have are, is there a way for us to close this education gap? And are there more cost-effective ways to teach clinical dentistry? I'm also really interested in hacking existing technologies and use them for teaching. Usually I go 2 weeks a year to Hawaii, and I provide sort of basic scientific dental teaching, as well as I'll do some clinical work in their clinic, usually as a demonstration. And then I'll do these sort of smaller research projects on the side. If you like, I can go through some of the research projects that I've done. The first project was a filling preparation exercise. And so, for those of you that aren't dentists, it's really precise. When I ask my students to do a filling, there are some very specific parameters that they have to do. So for example, this dimension, I want that to be about 0.8 millimeters. And I want this space here to be about a quarter of a millimeter. And so the students spend a lot of time in the dental school perfecting this precise technique. In Hawaii, not surprisingly, the students struggle with this. They're not doing it. And often the first time they do it is on a patient, which adds another level of complexity. And so I wanted to try and improve that. It's difficult for us to build a simulation clinic there. And so I tried this self-evaluation study. Self-evaluation and public evaluation is not something that's really culturally done in this part of Vietnam. A lot of people are more private and conservative. They don't want to be critical of their work in public. And it's an interesting skill. Once the students learned it, I think they really benefited from it. And so what I did was I took a group of near graduating dentists. These are students that have 1 foot out the door. And I said, hey, can you do a filling preparation for me? And so they made something like this. This is a plastic tooth. And if this was a real tooth, a filling preparation like this would probably result in the exposure of a nerve, needing a root canal, or even a tooth extraction. And so that's kind of disconcerting. We did this lecture on self-evaluation and photography. So we had the students photograph their filling preparations. We went through and gave constructive evaluation of what we would do better. And then we had them practice again. And on that second practice, they made a filling preparation that looked more like this, which is much better, looks much more like the ideal. And so that was really exciting for me. So in a 3-hour teaching intervention, we were able to improve some of their clinical dentistry and make more safer preparations. And we published that in the Journal of Global Oral Health. The next project I had was improving diagnosis in Hawaii. Dentistry is this interesting profession. It's very, very visual. We're always looking at x-rays. We're always looking at teeth. And it's challenging for the students in Hawaii because they don't have as much interaction with visual media. They rarely take x-rays on patients. They actually don't have assigned patients. So if you're dental school in the US, you have a whole group of 30 or 40 patients that you're seeing and evaluating all the time. They don't do that at all in Hawaii. And, so I wanted to develop a technique where they could practice these diagnostic skills, which are really important in dentistry for, predicting or just prescribing correct treatment. So I surveyed my students in Hawaii and I wanted to see, hey, how much Instagram do you guys use? Well, it turns out they use Instagram a ton. Very few of them have computers, but many of them are online using mobile platforms and social media. So my student Rebecca and I decided, well, why don't we make a learning module to emphasize some of the visual diagnostics in dentistry and put that on Instagram? And so we created this. We made an Instagram stories, and each story is a little teaching lecture. And it works kind of like this. So there are a series of slides. They've all been translated into Vietnamese. And the students can either passively watch on their phone and it'll scroll through, or things that they've seen and are familiar with, they can click and advance the story along. We launched this in the dental school. I actually first had them do a baseline test. So this is my class assessing their baseline for diagnostic skill. We do it as a group. And then we released the Instagram story. They were allowed to use it for a week. And we brought them back and tested again. and we measured the effectiveness of this intervention. Turns out it improved their baseline diagnostic skills from 49 to 73%, so that was successful. Not only that, it was really well liked. The students liked learning from this type of platform. That was published in the Journal of Tabi University Medical Science, and that just came out this year. You know, my future in a way is I want to continue our partnership, our relationship, and we're looking at building maybe a rural dental rotation in Hue. There's also room to do an exchange program between our dental clinics. And there's plenty of research we can do in terms of dental education between our two centers. And ultimately, I feel like we can learn a lot from each other as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's fascinating. And, you know, I was really quite surprised in your in the presentation that you just gave us, and the explanation of what you've been doing there is that it seems we had started off our conversation talking about the necessity for very kind of high-tech equipment and different things like that. But you seem to be, with this kind of hacking model, it looks to be very cost-effective in terms of the things that you've adopted and to work in this environment. And it seems very clever to start with those really basic, low capital intensive type things. One could imagine that you would have a sort of a mindset of thinking, well, we need all of this great infrastructure first, but actually just the basics of beginning with the students and quite what seemed to me very introductory, in a sense, skills just to build up that capacity, and then you can go from there. I mean, I imagine that doesn't preclude the fact that one still needs certain specialized equipment in particular cases, but for the majority of the cases of providing dental care, that probably is sufficient for a large number of things. Is that more or less accurate too?
Yeah, like with the modernizing of their diet, you know, the students are also modernizing in dentistry. So they're already going to the internet to find, you know, how to be a dentist, how to do certain procedures. And, you know, that may not always be the best resource for them. And I think there's a need for more of these basic science, these fundamental concepts, you know, to be available for them. I guess I should say a lot of the stuff that's currently online is like marketing based stuff, or really advanced sort of, hey, look what I can do type, you know, procedures where, you know, there's really this need for more of the fundamental stuff.
Mm-hmm. And this school is this a private school or is it a government run institution?
Yeah. It's all the schools. This one, oh, sorry, there are private dental schools in Vietnam. This one is a government-run school.
Okay.
The school is linked with the pharmacy university and the medical school, so they're all kind of in one campus.
Mm-hmm. And does it seem as if the government is willing to support this kind of collaboration in order to help build capacity, help train the next generation of dentists in Vietnam as well? Are they willing to invest, in other words, to help bring up the level of education?
Yeah, there's sort of there's a group at Harvard that's actually trying to do an entire curriculum reform, and like we're doing on the medical side, where they're doing medical curriculum reform. There's a top-down approach through the Harvard Dental School that's trying to do curriculum reform, but it's taking a while and it's difficult. It's you know, so I'm hoping that this sort of more grassroots will grow from the other side and will eventually connect together. But when I initially went to Hue, you know, I wasn't particularly well received. I was kind of questioned. The younger dentists and students were thrilled, obviously, because, you know, anytime someone new and foreign is coming, they're very excited. The older dentists, not so much. But as we built that relationship and that trust over the years, our team is very well received whenever we come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems, you know, because you've had a background working with other philanthropic organizations and things like that as well. Is there much interest just in terms of gaining other types of support that one could use in Vietnam as well, or is there not much directed towards this kind of work in dentistry?
Yeah, I mean, they would love to expand. In fact, we're in talks with another group called Global Dental Ambassadors that actually brings an entire team of volunteer dentists to teach. And so we're hoping that it'll take a little bit of weight off my shoulders, that I don't have to run the whole curriculum myself, but also have that integration from other dental specialists that can come and lecture for a few weeks at a time, and ultimately make that more sustainable too.
Mm-hmm. And so what are some of your kind of, well, we're obviously for the past year basically stuck in a position where all kinds of international engagement have more or less ceased with the pandemic, and that makes this kind of in-person teaching there and contact not possible. But it sounds as if the use of Instagram there was, in a sense, forward-looking and could be applied in this particular situation quite well. But I'd be curious to know if that will continue on, and then also just in terms of thinking of re-engagement and once we can begin to travel and things again, what are some of your plans going forward?
Yeah, I have several. I mean, the Instagram went well, and we're hoping to put together more modules using Instagram or other platforms that are easily shared with developing countries. Anyone with a smartphone, I think, should be able to access it. Other projects we have, those mannequins that I showed you that are in the Harvard clinic, those are really expensive. They're, $60,000. And, in this country, we've just gotten more and more complex teaching tools that are more and more costly. And so I'm curious if we can continue reversing that trend of let's try simple things like using self-evaluation, or there's another type of mannequin that's made with just a 3D printer that's just a few dollars to fabricate, and it operates kind of like a coloring book. So you imagine you're a dentist, or you're at your dentist holding this mirror. Well, instead of a drill, they're using a little pencil crayon on the end of a drill-like pencil. And so having students use exercises like this to build manual dexterity, so that when they graduate, there's not such a heavy burden, a learning burden that has to be learned by their patients initially.
Yeah, that's certainly, as a patient and not a doctor myself, one would hope not to be that person, right? To be the one who's being experimented on. But so yes, the more mannequins, the better, or other tools. I mean, that's a really fascinating application there of some new technologies that can, bring down these costs and make them, feasible, and also, something that can probably be done locally as well. So.
Yeah, and these things have benefits for our dental schools in the U.S. as well, where tuition is skyrocketing, and if there's ways we can, just be more efficient or more effective, more cost-effective with our training, that our students here can benefit from that as well.
Yeah. This is something that intrigues me from other parts of the world is, once one travels around and observe kind of the relationship of, say, just the everyday citizen to a class of doctors in different cultures, you realize it's not always the same as in the U.S., where we have a kind of very high respect for these specialists and the training that's involved in the education and all of that. I was just curious, the kind of status of a graduate from this institution when they go on to practice. What is their kind of position or station in life in terms of how they're received in communities and things like that? The culture of dentistry, I guess, is the kind of question I'm asking.
Yeah, having a professional degree like a dental degree is something that would be valued in that culture. Typically, when they graduate, they'll go and do a residency or work with another more experienced dentist, and just kind of spend a few years really developing their skills in a somewhat controlled space. That's typical how it works.
Yeah, it's interesting too to think where many of the different schools at Harvard. Obviously, we have students who come from abroad all the time to our graduate programs or specialized. Does the Harvard Dental School, does it actually have students who come from abroad as well, or are there any of the students from Vietnam that would ever possibly come to Harvard as well for education, or is that not possible?
Yeah, I mean, I would love that. We have some students who are Vietnamese born but are American,
Hmm.
living in the U.S. permanently in our diverse school. We don't have students that are coming sort of on exchange as of yet. We're doing clinical dentistry on campus, and that adds other layers of complexity in terms of vaccinations and liability that, you can't do that in like a business school setting, for example. It'd be a little bit easier to do that sort of partnership, but we're working on it, and we would love to share and do some kind of exchange like that at some point, but it's tricky.
But it sounds like that you have colleagues at the dental school that also who are interested in this kind of global kind of outreach and bringing the skills and in training abroad and participating. Do you have a sort of cohort of other dentists there that are willing to do this kind of training and actually travel to Vietnam and do it on site there?
Yeah, it's great. We're starting to grow that community here. We had a smaller one in San Francisco that would travel. Now that we're doing Zoom so frequently, it's been easy to do lectures remotely, and so some of my residents here in Boston and other dentists in the area have been giving lectures to the students in Hue. We actually have a Facebook group that we use to stay connected when we're not together. We run that kind of like a study club. And so that's often a way that, new lecturers or who are considering going can get some experience lecturing with the students is through our Facebook group.
Oh, that's fabulous. That's actually great. So it really does have an impact on the education here as well to give opportunities. I think the focus on Vietnam is obviously really important and really getting to know a single place. And there's all kinds of issues, I would imagine, in getting this set up that you've alluded to a little bit in terms of just the politics of it or just how to get oneself involved. Which takes building trust and relationships over time, I imagine. But as I'm speaking with you too, it really strikes me that this could be something that could have synergies across the region too, or in other places. Particularly, I was thinking in areas where there are so many projects at Harvard right now of people working in the area of kind of refugees, migration, political conflict zones, things like that I would imagine when you have the situations of displacement where people have to set up refugee camps. Again, there's so many things to think about, but dentistry must be right at in the middle of that as well as a key service that would need to be provided. It would be, I don't know if you've had any discussions along those lines, but I wonder if you know anything that's going along in terms of providing those kind of services as well.
Not as of yet. I know we would be very interested in working with teams doing sort of refugee relief type work. I know there are other programs, not through Harvard specifically, that do that. And there's sort of call to action type programs. If there's a crisis, some dentists can go and provide some relief as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. This is one of the ways we've tried to expand the purview of what at the Asia Center of really getting people to talk across disciplines, across some of the schools where we tend to be separated physically on the campus, but also so many other types of things get in the way from these collaborations. And as I've gotten to know people working on Asia from different schools, whether it's Harvard Humanitarian Initiative, the law school, Kennedy School, now the dental school, School of Public Health, obviously, you just start to realize there are all these fabulous synergies between these different people working in those areas that have interest in working in Asia. And I'm hoping that as we go forward, we can help foster some of these conversations, and actually more than just conversations, but actually build towards, action and being able to do things. And I think this conversation I've realized, and with the clever work that you've been doing there, that these are not necessarily, they can be, highly financially intensive types of projects, but also that they can be done at a reasonable level if one works in a sort of thoughtful way, as you've done in Hue in Vietnam as well. So,
well, thank you. Yeah, I just find when I'm in these remote areas, there's just room to be creative, and I really like that about doing these types of things. And the more collaboration we can have, the better. I think the Asia Center is a phenomenal resource. I've never seen anything like this at a university before. And I hope to connect with others that have similar projects that we can synergize and collaborate with.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. And we'll do the best we can. And this is actually a really wonderful start to doing that, is just getting the word out on what people are doing. And I think it's a fascinating case study of just showing how you got in, made a trip, saw a problem, started to think about possible solutions, didn't think that one had to come in with a massive solution to solve everything all at once, but just start. What are some small things? Where can we start to begin this process? And then build from there, right? It's a really admirable thing. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing there. And also thank you for taking the time to speak today, Russell.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.